Hey friends, how you doing? Eric Eulis here. All right, wanted to bring you up to date really quickly on the investigation into DB Cooper, and in particular, a new person of interest who also has a connection to Rem-Cru Titanium. Now, for those of you who are familiar with me or are familiar with my investigation and the work that I've done on this case, I feel very passionately about following the science, following the evidence as far as I understand it. And obviously the tie, in particular, the particles that came from the tie are critically important and tell a story. So for a couple of years now, I have really zeroed in on a company called Rem-Cru Titanium. They later changed their name to Crucible Steel. And the primary reason I've been interested in that company and men who worked at that company is because there are particles on the tie, specifically titanium and antimony particles, several of them, that are on the tie that appear to have only been able to come from this Rem-Cru Titanium. So let me repeat that. These titanium and antimony particles apparently could have only come from the Rem-Cru Titanium / Crucible Steel, because this was a patented alloy, titanium alloy. It's something that wasn't commercially produced or commercially disseminated, and obviously Rem-Cru Titanium was the company that had the patent on this particular alloy. I know they worked on it in the 50s. They also worked with this particular alloy in the mid-60s, 1965. That's critically important because when we're considering DB Cooper's tie and the particles that came from DB Cooper's tie, we got to remember that DB Cooper's tie was manufactured in 1964 and was likely purchased somewhere around Christmas of 1964. So up to this point, there's been one gentleman in particular that I've spent a lot of time looking into, a guy named Vince Peterson. I've talked about at length. Checks a lot of the boxes as far as the evidence is concerned, as well as some of the physical attributes that we know DB Cooper had, specifically a guy that was about 50 years old and a guy that was about 6'1". Now, again, that's pretty telling, because if you look at actuarial numbers related to men who were 6'1", back around 1971, this means that they were born right around, in the 20s, right around the 1920s. Only 10% of men were 6 foot or 6'1". So if the primary witness descriptions of DB Cooper being 6 foot, 6'1" are accurate, you can check off 90% of persons of interest or suspects just on the height alone, because most American men weren't of that height. In fact, very few American men were 6 foot, 6'1". Pretty tall for a guy back at that time. So of course, Vince Peterson checked the box on that. And there were a number of other things that are of significance. Specifically, he can account for the tie particles, because obviously DB Cooper was wearing a tie at work, and he came across these particles somehow, in some way, and got a significant number of them on his skinny black clip-on tie from JCPenney. So not many men can account for the tie. There are a lot of spectacular stories of Green Berets and all kinds of people, expert skydivers and the like, but the problem with these men invariably is they cannot account for the tie. And if you can't match the evidence, or you can't explain the evidence, then you just ain't the guy. That's just reality. That's just the way it is. So recently, I was looking into some of the other men who worked at Rem-Cru Titanium, Crucible Steel, and there are about 100 that are of primary interest because they wore ties that worked. They were metallurgists, they were engineers, and so forth. And there was another person of interest, I'll call this guy another person of interest, somebody that came to my attention, who checks a couple of these boxes. First of all, he can account for the tie particles. I can explain, I can understand easily how this person could account for the tie particles. Again, accumulating these tie particles from starting somewhere around, let's say, New Year's Day 1965 moving forward. So that's the first thing, and that's a really big thing, and most men can't account for that part right there. So that's the first thing. The second thing, as far as the age is concerned, the guy was approximately 50 years of age, so that checks the box as far as that goes. The guy was 6'1", so it checks the box as far as that goes. And I've actually seen a picture of this guy as well, and I do believe there is enough of a resemblance to the specifically the Bing Crosby sketch whereby he can't be eliminated. Again, it's important to note that the sketches, all of the sketches, there are a few of them out there, should only be used for the purposes of really eliminating somebody. In other words, if somebody comes along that clearly doesn't appear to match any of the sketches, then I think you can safely eliminate somebody. You can't look at a sketch and say, wow, that sketch looks just like so-and-so, therefore so-and-so must have been D.B. Cooper. Because first of all, there are a few different sketches, even though I believe the original Bing Crosby sketch is the closest one. But importantly, the operative word here is sketch. It's a sketch, not a photograph, it's a sketch. So that's the important thing to remember here. So just as in the case of Vince Peterson, when you look at pictures of Vince Peterson from around that time frame, there's enough of a resemblance in my mind whereby he cannot be eliminated. And the same thing with this new person of interest. Now, I'm not going to name this person of interest right now. I'm continuing to dig into this person of interest, and we'll see what we'll find out there. But as it stands right now, I'll say there are two men. There are two men that are of particular interest to me that came from Rem-Cru Titanium and can explain the type particles and check some of the other critical boxes as far as that's concerned. Now, was one of these two men D.B. Cooper? Don't know. I don't know yet. And hopefully we'll be able to figure it out looking at DNA and type particles and other things there. But the truth of the matter is I don't know whether either of these two men were D.B. Cooper. By definition, they both couldn't have been D.B. Cooper. So at least one of them wasn't D.B. Cooper, if not both of them. It is entirely possible that neither one of them was D.B. Cooper. But having said that, when you look at the universe of prospective D.B. Coopers from 53 years ago, I can tell you there are very, 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 very few men that check the boxes in my mind could have been D.B. Cooper. In fact, I'll go on the record and say, in my mind, there's really only two at this point that I think could have plausibly been D.B. Cooper because they can explain the type particles and they check the boxes on some of the other physical attributes as far as that goes. So I'll keep you up to speed with this as this thing develops. I don't want to get ahead of myself with respect to this and this new person of interest. I will say that it appears all but certain that Vince Peterson knew this person, knew this other individual, which is something I've been saying all along with respect to Vince Peterson, is that I've been convinced that Vince Peterson either was D.B. Cooper or he knew D.B. Cooper. In other words, he was very, very close to D.B. Cooper, again, because of the type particles, the evidence that was found upon D.B. Cooper's type. We're dealing with a very small universe of men that, frankly, could have been D.B. Cooper as far as I'm concerned. And the more I look into this and then we go through and look at, at a little closer look into the men, the 100+ men, and a little more in depth. Most of them are very easy to check off for one reason or another off the list and say, yeah, there's no real plausible way they could have been D.B. Cooper. The overwhelming majority, as a matter of fact. But there are a couple here, Vince Peterson being one, and this new person of interest being the other person, that in my mind could have possibly been D.B. Cooper. So, as always, nothing is perfect. It's never a perfect fit. And I've said this many times before that when we figure out who D.B. Cooper was, and I do believe we'll eventually figure out who this guy was, he's an individual who's going to check, like 85% of kind of what we expected him to be. In other words, we're going to see the guy and we're going to say, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. He's about 85% of what we expected D.B. Cooper to be and look like and sound like and everything else. But then there's going to be that other 15% that's just a little off, that's slightly off because of, we're dealing with, witness testimony, those kind of things. 53 years out, there's no cameras, all that good stuff there. So there are a couple of things, I wouldn't consider them critical, but there are a couple of things that are slightly off as far as it goes. Nothing that's a deal breaker in my mind. So definitely, again, worth keeping in mind as I dig into this guy further, and we'll see what happens there. So that's where we are right now, and I'll keep you in the loop as far as this goes as new information comes out. We're going to continue to work on the DNA front and see if we can get the FBI to play ball and maybe offer an assist as far as looking at some of these binary DNA comparisons, specifically with Vince Peterson's DNA, because I do have Vince Peterson's DNA. Now, with respect to this other person of interest, I do not have a DNA sample of this person yet. I have reached out to the family. I have been unsuccessful so far in getting a hold of anybody in this person's family, and who knows? Maybe I'm just unsuccessful and I don't get the opportunity. But we'll see how that develops. We'll see what happens as far as that goes. So there you go. That's it. That's what I've got for you today. Of course, as usual, any comments or questions, feel free to shoot me an email, eric@ericulis.com. And until next time, as always, folks, cheers.